Okay, good evening, everyone. Tonight, as part of the Fifth Avenue Synagogue Sunday night speaker series, we have a highly interesting discussion for you. Dan Grunfeld, author of the soon-to-be released, I think November 30th, is that correct, Dan?
That's right.
Soon-to-be released book, By the Grace of the Game, who join us this evening. Dan's grandmother is a Holocaust survivor, and his father is Ernie Grunfeld, a former New York Knicks guard and executive. Dan himself is a former professional basketball player. Our dear friend and Fifth Avenue Synagogue member, Ben Goldberg, will formally introduce Dan. Ben's grandfather is of course the legendary William Goldberg, and who was a founding member of Fifth Avenue Synagogue. I'm told that he used to have a certain Purim program that was a highlight of the year for all the members. And Ben himself continues the family legacy and is a founding member of our Friday night learning program that started a couple of years ago. And hope you could come this week, Ben. We're planning
yes, gotta get that.
A baby naming, please God, and a very exciting program in the shul. Ben and Elise are truly wonderful individuals, couple of stellar character who are blessed with a truly wonderful family. I want to use this opportunity to thank Ben for his friendship, his personal friendship, and for everything he does for our community, the Fifth Avenue Synagogue. And please God, may we be blessed to share in many happy occasions together in good health for many years to come.
Thank you, Rabbi.
It's all yours.
All right, thank you very much for having me. So Danny Grunfeld and I were dear old friends. We grew up together. Families are extremely close, and it's really an honor for me to be able to introduce him tonight. Although I'd like to say my basketball career was something to talk about. It was not really. It ended after my senior year at Ramaz. But on the other hand, Danny went on to play at Stanford, have an illustrious basketball career, was an All-American. He played at Stanford. He was a superstar. If it wasn't for an injury, I think he probably would have been a lottery pick. So he had quite an impressive career. I couldn't be more excited about Danny's book, By the Grace of the Game. For him to have brought together the two topics, basketball and the Holocaust, it really touches so many people across so many generations, and certainly myself and my family included. Danny and his father Ernie may have been professional basketball players in high positions in the NBA, but one thing about them and their families, they are really grounded and rooted in their family traditions and their history, and the definition of Hamisha, and they're some of the menchiest people I've ever met in my life. And I'm just very happy to be associated with them. And I know Danny, for sure, your grandmother, who's a Holocaust survivor, must be so proud of you, and just so thrilled with this book that you are putting out there. And I'm so excited for everyone to hear about it and for myself to read it. And Danny, the stage is yours.
Ben, thank you so much, man. Love you, love the family. I'm so grateful for this opportunity. Great to talk to folks today. And yeah, just really pleased to be here. And Jacob, thank you so much for your leadership with this. And I'm excited for our conversation.
So am I. And just to echo what the rabbi said, Ben, appreciate your friendship and your leadership in the community. And we're very grateful for it. So thank you. And thank you for making tonight happen. So Dan, to start, why don't you give us your background, where you're born, where you're from? I assume a lot of it's a book, but try to give us a little bit of an overview, if that's okay.
Absolutely. So it's funny, my birth was scheduled around NBA basketball. My dad was a player for the Knicks, and he had 2 road trips at the time I was going to be born. And so my birth was planned around those road trips, so my dad could be there for my birth and my bris. So, I was born, he took a road trip, came back on the 8th day for my bris. So grew up outside of the city in northern New Jersey. My dad was playing for the Knicks at that time. As I got older, he transitioned onto the management side. And so just, grew up in the tri-state area, all about, New York Knicks basketball, but really kind of, that's where I came up. And then I moved in high school and went to in Milwaukee, Wisconsin. But yeah, my formative years were spent in outside of New York City.
Okay, so you growing up, your dad is a super basketball star, and so tell us about yourself before we talk about your dad. But you said you went to college where? I'm sorry.
I went to Stanford. And
Okay,
so,
Stanford.
I always, people ask me, since my dad was an NBA player, he worked in the NBA, did you always know you wanted to do that? Or was there pressure around that? And so I think the answer to both those questions is yes. I always knew I wanted to do it. And there is pressure when kind of your dad does what you want to do, but that pressure never came from my parents. I'm so lucky, as Ben can tell you, I have the best parents in the world. And, particularly my dad, who was a big basketball star, he never put any pressure on me to even play the game, let alone succeed. It was just something that was inside of me. And I'll chat more about my family story and about my book, and you'll get a sense kind of how much the game means to our family. And so it's just something I always wanted to do. So, spent my weekends going to Knicks practice with my dad and working on my basketball skills in our driveway. His last year with the Knicks was in 1999. He then went to be the general manager of the Milwaukee Bucks. So I went to high school in Milwaukee, Wisconsin, and I was a little bit of a late bloomer, but I was telling y'all before we joined the call, I visited Stanford's campus in 7th grade while my sister was looking at colleges. And that's where my grandmother lives, in the Bay Area, and so I said, this is where I want to go. This is where I want to play my college basketball, great school, great basketball program, be close to my grandmother. And I really do think it was the universe that kind of came together and made it happen. I think it's because my grandma deserved it. We deserved to be together for those 4 years. So you played my basketball at Stanford.
So you played at Stanford, and I saw in your bio you played in Israel at some point. So walk us through you playing in Stanford, and then tell us after Stanford what happened.
So Ben mentioned it. So my junior year at Stanford, I was having it was my moment. I was the second leading scorer in the Pac-10 conference, and I was kind of projected to be an NBA draft pick. And I tore my ACL on national television at the worst time, and so it kind of was something I had to overcome. And I actually write about this quite candidly in my book, because the things that my grandparents had to overcome, and even the things that my dad had to overcome, we all it's all different, of course, and you cannot compare a knee injury to, of course, the Holocaust. But, I tried to apply what I learned from them about perseverance, to kind of get over that disappointment in my career. And interestingly, my first professional season, I played in Germany. And so I write in the book, I'm probably the only professional basketball player who had to call his grandmother to ask permission to sign his first contract, which is the absolute truth. My agent said, hey, I have a great opportunity for you. So, I was psyched. I was excited. And he said, yeah, it's in Germany. I said, okay, let me talk to my grandma. And so I called her, and she didn't hesitate. She said to me, she calls me Tatala, which is a Yiddish term of endearment. I'm sure we all have some version of that from our grandparents or parents. But she said, Tatala, sons are not responsible for the sins of their fathers. She said, go to Germany, enjoy. And so, yeah, played a year in Germany, 3 in Spain, and then 4 in Israel, including for the team in Jerusalem for 2 years, which was really special.
Thanks for sharing, because I have a lot of friends that, won't buy German cars, they won't buy German clothes, but you're right. You're the first one ever that actually had to ask permission to play in Germany. But that's great. So your grandmother gave you the blessing.
Absolutely.
So then you got into venture capital. Just walk me through, and then we're going to go into the book and your dad's career. So you're at Stanford, you get injured, you're playing in Germany. Go ahead.
Playing in Germany, had a good rookie year, then went to Spain, had a good second year. Actually was trying out for NBA teams after that second year, because my professional career was going quite well. And I was invited to training camp by the Knicks, which was really special. I had a little bit of an injury during the summer, and I could only attend a few of these tryouts, and one of them happened to be with the Knicks. And I had my best tryout. I played great. And so they invited me to training camp, and I was one of the last people cut before the season. So I at least knew what it felt like to put a Knicks jersey on with my name on it. I had put a Knicks jersey on with my last name on it before, but it didn't belong to me. It was my dad's. And so now I had my own. So had that experience, played in Spain for several years, and then, went to Israel. And actually in 2009, I played in the Maccabiah games. And that was an amazing experience. Bruce Pearl of Auburn University was our head coach, and we won the gold medal. And that was my first time in Israel. And I'll tell you a little bit more about my family story, but when my dad and his parents fled Romania as refugees, they were bound for Israel. And it was kind of at the last minute that they came to the United States. And so most of our families in Israel, and I just had such a profound experience there. The basketball was great, but more so just really, getting in touch with my Jewish identity, my family's identity. And so I had a year left on my contract in Spain at that point. But I told my parents, I said, when that contract's over, basically I'm coming home, right? I'm going to play in Israel. And that's exactly what happened. And so I played a year in Herzliya, which for folks who know Israel is not a bad place to start your career in Israel, right? I was living on the beach, like it was amazing. And I had a good year. My team did very well. And then I went to Hapoel Jerusalem for 2 seasons, which is a big club in Israel, and living right outside of Jerusalem and, eating dinner outside of the old city after games was just an incredible experience. And so then I went back to Herzliya for my last year. So I retired in 2014. And I tell people I spent my last year studying for the GMAT, to get into business school. And I probably worked harder on that test that I did on my basketball skills. And it kind of showed in both. I did well on the test, but didn't have the kind of the best closing year to my career, but got back into Stanford for business school, which was a great blessing, and graduated with my MBA from there in 2017. And since then, I've kind of worked in tech in Silicon Valley, and I now work for a venture capital firm in the area.
So let's talk about that before we get into the book. So from 17, so the last 5 years or so, you've been working at a venture capital firm?
I've been at the venture capital firm for 2.5 years. Prior to that, I was at a startup.
Okay, so talk about the venture capital just for a minute or two. So you're getting in early tech companies, Stanford graduates, or?
That's right. So it's a big venture capital firm in Silicon Valley. Our 4 founding partners all met in business school at Stanford. This is in the early 90s. And so they built our firm into kind of a juggernaut, investing in early stage companies. But now we invest at all stages of a startup now. So we have quite a big growth team as well. But it's a tremendous firm. I'm not on the investing team. I'm on the operations team. So my experience is, I worked with our startup to help it grow and on the revenue side. And so now I do that with our portfolio companies, that we invest in. So I learn a lot. I'm exposed to a lot of interesting people with different ideas. And so it's a very cool environment. I feel very lucky to be a part of the firm I am with.
So walk us through the process. So when did you decide you were going to write this book, and when did you start on it?
So I've always loved to write, even as a little kid. My mom said when I was little, he's going to be a writer, because I'd come from basketball practice and I would write stories and poems. And I always tell everyone's a writer, right? If it's in you and if it's something you like to do, and it's just something I always love to do. So when I was playing professionally, I had contributing writing positions to several websites, and I put out a lot of writing, and it did fairly well, and I really loved it. But I always knew that there was this bigger story, and for me, I always told my wife, like, there's a truth to this that's very profound that I just want to convey. I knew what my family had been through. I knew what basketball had done for my dad and for me and our family. And so I always, after I retired, and I kind of had a sense that I want to try to tell this story. I mean, it wasn't until I got into business school and had a little bit of time and space to explore other interests where I said, I'm going to write it. And so in 2016, I started doing the research. It took me about 1.5 years just to do the research to understand what happened. My grandmother was one of 10 siblings. 5 survived, 5 were killed. Both of her parents were killed in Auschwitz. My grandfather lost everyone. And, there's a big history there. So, and it's a hard history. So, to understand that, and that took 1.5 years. It took me, 8 to 10 months to write the first draft, and I've been going ever since. So all in all, it's been more than 5 years now. And so the book comes out in 2 weeks. You can imagine, the emotions of that for me. And it almost feels surreal because, listen, I just told you about my day job, which I love, and I'm very grateful to have. This book is something that is eternal for me, right? This is the story of my family, and this is what my grandparents and my dad went through. So I could have the opportunities I have, right? This is the biggest thing I'll ever do.
So, a lot of Holocaust survivors don't like to talk about. We did a program with 2 Holocaust survivors, but it's very hard to get them to talk about it. It's very sad. It's depressing. So I'm just curious if you could, was your grandmother, 100% there? I want to talk to you. I want to support you. Or did it take time for her to really open up, because it's got to be traumatic?
Yeah, it's a great question. She was 100% there. And even before I started writing the book, she was 100% there, because she always told stories. She always talked about her father. And so her father was her hero. He was killed in Auschwitz. His name was Solomon. My son's name is Solomon after him. That's, I always heard stories of her loved ones who were lost. And she, first of all, felt comfortable talking about it, which, of course, if you don't feel comfortable, it's 100% understandable. She did. But even further, she almost feels like it's her obligation. And I actually had a conversation with her recently because, listen, she's 96 years old. She's doing amazing. She plays bridge 5 times a week. She just cooked us a huge feast, 2 weekends ago. We had food all week. She's doing amazing, but she hasn't read my entire book yet. And I wanted to tell her, and I call her Anyu, which means mother in Hungarian. I said, Anyu, it's very hard. There's really difficult things. And she said, I never want to forget them. So it's almost an imperative for her to talk about it, to have the story told. And I, imagine my pride to be able to tell her, Anu, they live forever now. Their stories are told. So, and she just happens, and Ben knows my grandmother. She has this amazing memory. She just has this amazing spirit. But I mean, there were details, and we'll get into her story in specifics, but she was in the Budapest ghetto. And I mean, she had, details and dates. And so it was such a rich, the story in itself is incredible, but her ability to convey information that then allowed me to tell the story was just a beautiful thing.
Okay, so walk us. So you start with your grandmother, getting the history, which is a lot. That's your first. I assume that's your first year and a half of the work on the book.
It's my grandma, but it's also my dad. Because people know my dad as he was played for the Knicks. He was the GM of the Knicks. He was a high school basketball star in Forest Hills, Queens, right? But my dad is an immigrant from Romania. He came to the United States at 9 years old, not speaking a word of English, having never touched a basketball. And then about a decade later, he's a gold medalist for the United States. It's an amazing American dream story that people don't really know much about. So I also, I tell that story as well. So interviewing my grandmother, interviewing my dad, I would record the conversations, transcribe them, and then just do the historical research around that, because our story kind of weaves in and out of some really interesting points in history. So kind of understanding how does it all connect, and also what's my dad's place in Jewish sports history. And I talked to every Jewish sports historian, every league, and it wasn't until I started writing the book and I really got into the process that the research showed that my dad's the only player in NBA history whose parents survived the Holocaust. And according to the research, he's the only player in the history of major American sports whose parents survived the Holocaust. It's not a stat people track, right? But as I started asking every league and no one can find another name. So that's a really important story. And if you can get from that point to where he got and where my family got, it's a story worth telling.
Right. So let's talk about your dad, because I remember the Knicks when your dad was general manager. But let's start. So he comes to America at 9 years. You said 9 years old.
That's
He's
right.
in Forest Hills. So I assume he started playing basketball in high school already, or very young.
So my dad came when he was 9. Immigrants, Holocaust survivors. My grandparents opened up a fabric store in the Bronx. They were work to try to build a life. My dad had an older brother who was 8 years older than him. He was his hero. Pretty much immediately when they got to the United States, my uncle was diagnosed with leukemia, and he passed away a year later. So this was just another kind of tragedy in my family. Of course, an extraordinarily difficult thing for everyone. And so for my dad, as an immigrant, again, who didn't speak the language, he did what kids did in New York City at the time. He went to the local park to play basketball, to make friends, to learn English, and really to heal. And he just played, and he was good. And then he was very, very good. And I write about this in detail in my book that, so for me growing up, right, I grew up outside of New York City. My dad was the GM of the Knicks. I had a lot of privileges. My mom drove me to every game I played as a youth, right? My dad was working with me in my driveway on my basketball skills. My grandparents didn't see my dad play basketball until he was a junior in high school. And his high school coach called at their fabric store, and my grandmother answered, and he said, "Mrs. Grunfeld, you have to see this. Your son is special." And again, I tell this story in pretty vivid detail, but my dad's high school games were at 4 p.m. and my grandparents weren't going to close their fabric store, right? These are immigrants. There's no way. And so eventually they decided, okay, they closed the store. They went to the gym to see him play, but the gym was full when they got there. And the usher said, "Sorry, you can't come in. The gym is full." And their English wasn't very good. And my grandfather tried to say, "We're parents of a player," but they wouldn't let him in. And finally, my grandmother said, "Our son's name is Ernie Grunfeld." And the usher said, "Why didn't you say so? Get in here." And they opened the door. And as they moved into the gym, they were looking around, and my grandfather kind of nudged my grandmother, and in Hungarian, which is their native language, he said, "Well, if he's so good, why isn't he playing?" And my grandma said his name was Shunyi in Hungarian. She said, Shunyi, look right there. That's Ernie. He couldn't even recognize his own son because he had almost like, it was like a transformation before their very eyes, right? They knew this little boy from Europe who had lost his brother and, you know, tough background. And all of a sudden here he is on a basketball court. My grandfather couldn't even recognize him. And so he told him on the court after the game, because my grandfather used to make him come to their fabric store to work on the weekends. He said, you never have to come to the store again. Just play basketball. We'll take care of the rest.
Wow, that's amazing. So your dad, he goes to college in Tennessee right afterwards?
That's right. He was one of the most highly recruited players in the country, went to the University of Tennessee, paired with Bernard King, another famous New Yorker, you know, from Brooklyn, great high school player, amazing college player.
Crazy story, right?
They both have kind of interesting backgrounds. They went down to Knoxville together, and they became one of the greatest duos in college basketball history. They both averaged more than 25 points per game one season together. And so they were called the Ernie and Bernie Show. They were on the cover of Sports Illustrated. And yeah, my dad was a four-time All-SEC player, and he left Tennessee as the school's all-time leading scorer and the second leading scorer in the history of the SEC, which, by the way, to this day, he's the fifth leading scorer in the history of the SEC. So, you know, his high school and college basketball careers, he was really a phenomenon.
Got it. So walk us through, your dad went from Tennessee to, he originally played with who? Was it Milwaukee, or who did he play with originally?
He was drafted by the Milwaukee Bucks.
Okay.
So he was the 11th pick in the NBA draft. And so he was drafted in Milwaukee, and that's where we met my mom, who's born and raised in Milwaukee. And my maternal grandfather was an original actually owner of the Milwaukee Bucks. That was back when it was kind of more of a community, you know, endeavor. And so my mom kind of had a, you know, basketball background. And my dad asked a very typical question, a, you know, young Jewish guy in a new city, hey, any nice Jewish girls in town? You know, and so that's how he got connected with my mom, and the rest is history there. But so my dad played in the NBA 2 years with the Bucks, 3 years with the Kansas City Kings, and then the last 4 years of his career.
Kansas City Kings, who don't, that's the Sacramento today?
That's right. That's right. So my older, and he had his best run as an NBA player. You know, he was a star in college. He was more of a role player in the NBA, a solid role player. But his Kings team went to the Western Conference Finals. He actually was starting at point guard, which was not his position, but he had a really, really great run there. And then he did last 4 years of his career with the New York Knicks, you know, so really a homecoming. Because listen,
so who was on that Knicks team? Was that one of the more famous Knicks teams, or who did he play with?
Well, he played with Bernard King, you know, so he teamed up with Bernard again. He played with Bill Cartwright. You know, it was kind of a different generation then. But Patrick Ewing's rookie year was my dad's last year, so he played with Patrick. So yeah, Rory Sparrow, Trent Tucker, guys like that.
Okay, so it's 4 years playing for the Knicks, and then he goes right into general manager of the Knicks, or what's the process?
So and I learned this researching the book. He had opportunities to play in Cleveland or Utah to continue his career, but you know, we're settled outside of New York City. I think my mom liked it, so he hung up the sneakers. The Knicks hired him as a broadcaster. So he was broadcasting games on the radio and doing some scouting in between. But the interesting thing about that, and I read about this in my book, when my dad got to America, my grandparents wanted him to go to a yeshiva in the Bronx. And he was denied admittance to the yeshiva because he couldn't speak English. And so here he was all these years later announcing games on New York radio, Knick games, you know, and no one, you know, of course, he came just in time not to have an accent. So no one kind of knows this past, but his first job was as an announcer, and he quickly became an assistant coach and then, you know, general manager not long after. So, you know, listen, I mean, my dad used to take the subway to watch the Knicks play at the Old Garden with my grandfather as immigrants sitting in the nosebleeds, you know, just trying to learn a new sport. And here he is playing for the team and then becoming the general manager of the team. You know, that's, you know, I say you can't write the story, but I tried to. You know, you can't make it up, but I tried to write it.
So talk about so he's general manager. So Ewing is still there. To talk about the team then, and give us it's a 10-year period, give or take.
Give or take. So I mean, so he was with the team for 17 years total, right, from 1982 to 1999. He was the general manager of the team for roughly 7-8 years in the 90s. And this was we were just talking about it a bit before, this is the peak of New York Knicks basketball. John Starks, Charles Oakley, Patrick Ewing, you know, this is a team that played with heart and toughness and passion, everything New York City loves. And so I would, you know, be in Madison Square Garden and the electricity, the roof would come off the place. People were so excited about the Knicks, you know, and even to this day, people ask me, are you still a Knicks fan? I say, I'm always a Knicks fan, you know, because if you've seen it when the Knicks are good and when New York City is on fire with basketball, there's nothing like it, you know, and for me to grow up in that environment and to watch games with my dad in the skybox of the general manager of the team, but knowing where he came from to have that position, you know, it's always just such a special thing for our family.
Got it. So how old are you when he's general manager? How old are you then?
So I was, you know, roughly, so let's call it 7 years old to 15 years old. But
Oh,
my whole
okay.
childhood, he was with the Knicks, right? So if he's not GM, he was VP of player personnel or he was an assistant coach. So I was always at practices and at the Garden, but he started running the team in about 1992. I was about 7, 8 years old at that point.
Got it. Okay. And then remind me again, after the Knicks, he ends up in Washington, the Wizards, right? At the
Well,
end.
he went to the Milwaukee Bucks first.
Interesting.
and
Where
so
you met your mom, right?
Yeah. So back
Milwaukee.
in, what's that?
Is it back to where you met your mom?
Back
right?
to our roots, and we actually lived in my grandparents' house when we were having our own house, you know, so like it seems random for a family from northern New Jersey to move to Milwaukee, Wisconsin, but for us it wasn't. We have very deep ties in that community, and so, you know, he spent 4 great years with the Bucks. One of his teams went to Game 7 of the Eastern Conference Finals, had a lot of success there. I kind of blossomed as a high school player, went off to Stanford, and then he became the president and general manager of the Washington Wizards in 2003, where he was there until 2019 and built several, you know, great teams there as well. So he had this storybook career, certainly as a player, as an executive, and you know, this is kind of an unknown history. You know, again, being the only player in the history of major American sports whose parents survived the Holocaust, and you know what he went through with losing his brother, and kind of how you know, finding basketball at on the playgrounds in New York City and where it took our family. It's, you know, it's really a remarkable thing.
No, it is. And also you know, also a lot of players leave basketball and don't necessarily, it sounds like your dad kept on accelerating his career
100%.
even after he played.
Absolutely. I mean, and for me, I had such a great example because I was a pro as well, but I retired at 30. You know, my dad retired at 31, and so I had that role model and that example of, hey, like, you're still a young person when the ball stops bouncing. And you know, for as well as my dad did as a player, and he became a legend in a lot of ways, you know, his executive career was probably even better, which is just an amazing thing to say. And particularly if you take into account his background, you know, he grew up under communism. You know, and I go into a lot of great detail in the book about what that was really like. I mean, that's easy to say, right? Oh, you grew up under communism, you fled as a refugee. These are real things that happen, you know. So to come to a country to never having played the sport, not speaking the language, and to become what he became it's just remarkable.
No, agree. And you said, so is your grandfather alive also, or just your grandmother?
My grandfather passed away in 1986 when I was a baby.
Okay.
Yeah.
And your grandmother's still, you said, in the Bay Area, correct?
Doing amazing. 96. You know, as I mentioned, there were 10 siblings in her house. 5 of them survived, and she outlived all of her siblings by 30 years. So she's the matriarch of the family. She is the role model, the hero, the example. I mean, we talk on the phone every day and FaceTime with her great grandson, and there's no one like her.
So talk about the book. Is this a one-off? Is this like the one book you've been wanting to write? Or are you going to do other books? Is this book going to become a movie? Like where do you, what's your vision? Sort of, you know, where are things going?
So I love to write. I'll never write this story again, right? This is the story, right? This is my family. This is my legacy. But I would love to continue to tell stories in certain ways. And regarding this story, I've already had conversations with people about adapting it in different formats. I think people are getting a little bit of a sense that it's a special story. You know, when you talk about survival on this scale and perseverance and triumph, you know, that's a really relatable human thing. And so I would love to be able to tell the story in different formats, whether that's you know, if it's a movie, if it's a docuseries, whatever it may be. Like, it would be amazing. And you know, I mentioned my grandmother. You know, she was saved twice during the Holocaust by Raoul Wallenberg. You know, and he's one of the greatest heroes of the Holocaust. The street outside of the museum in DC is called Raoul Wallenberg Northwest. You know, Wallenberg saved her twice in Budapest. She was in the Budapest ghetto. She risked her life to save other people's, which she did. So I tell people she's my hero, but she's also a hero. You know, so you know, for her to have such a big survival story, my grandfather didn't have it easy, but he had it easier. He was in a forced labor camp in Hungary, but go into a lot of detail on what it took for them to survive and what happened to the rest of the family. All their parents, all my dad's grandparents were killed in Auschwitz, so kind of not only coming to terms with that history, but really understanding it. So that can only happen in this book.
So you and your dad, as far as the NBA today, is your dad's not directly involved. You guys are just fans today, right? You're not.
That's right. So he left the Washington Wizards in 2019, and being a grandpa, taking time but listen, the game is inside both of us, and that's a big theme of the book, right? What the game did for our family is incredible. And the title of the book, as you said, is By the Grace of the Game. That's very intentionally picked because, the game is heaven sent. I mean, for people to go through what my family went through, for my dad to go through what he went through, and then to find a game like basketball and for him to be so good at it and for it to take us literally around the world and bring people together, it's a really beautiful thing. And so we'll always be connected to the game. And I'm at their house right now, because my family were visiting the East Coast, and we were just watching an NBA basketball game before he came up. With two random teams.
The Clippers, the Lakers or the Clippers game?
No, it was the Atlanta Hawks and the Milwaukee Bucks. We're just fans of the game, right? We're just enjoying basketball together. It'll always be that way.
So because you'll have your dad on later, but talk about from your perspective, what in the NBA excites you the most? Like, what are the positive, the 3-point, or what are you into? Or because the game has changed. We interviewed Mark Lazary twice, but he's the current owner of the Bucks, and they just won the championship. But the game is evolving, and I'm curious, your perspective on that.
I love basketball when it's played with passion and enthusiasm, like the Knicks played, right? I grew up, that was how I was kind of trained. I think that's there more so during the playoffs. It's a very long season. So I love kind of when the ante gets up and things get really competitive. I think that athletes have never been more athletic, never been more skilled. When you look at players like LeBron James and Steph Curry and what they do, shooting the ball from deep, but also the athleticism, the dexterity, the durability. My dad and I both were just amazed at how skilled and amazing and just great these players are. So I love seeing just tremendous displays of skill and kind of when the season gets more competitive and the games get more competitive, there's nothing like it. There's nothing like a great NBA game.
So I assume you like the new playoff format, the end of the season, so it motivates teams to work harder.
I do like it. And actually, I wrote about it. I do some writing for some different websites. And so when I played in Europe, there's this thing called relegation. And so if you finish in one of the bottom two spots in a league in Europe, you're relegated to the lower league the next year. But what that does is that maintains the competitiveness of all teams throughout the year because you're always fighting for something. So I think what the NBA did, it's kind of adjacent to that in that, they want people to be competitive, So, and I think the data last season showed that there were like 6 or 7 teams who would have had nothing to play for at the end of the year, but all of a sudden they're able to now play for a playoff spot. And I think the product of the NBA was elevated because of that. So I'm 100% in favor of that.
Okay, talk about maybe it's covered in your book, which I haven't read yet. But the NBA, Judaism, like what's the correlation? Like what do you how do you put the two together?
I researched it a lot. I wrote about it a lot in the book. So basketball was a Jewish game, when it was started, and there's been a lot written about that. I talk specifically about the New York Knicks because their first season, all 5 members of their starting lineup were Jewish, right? The first NBA game was played, I think, in 1946, so a year roughly after Auschwitz was liberated, and the first basket in NBA history was scored by a guy named Ozzie Sheckman from Kew Gardens, Queens. And again, all 5 members of that starting lineup were Jewish. Over time, that's become less and less so. And my dad is one of the, few kind of Jewish players who've had prominent NBA careers. But the link between Judaism and basketball is, it's very strong. And I also write in my book about some of the anti-Semitism, right? There were anti-Semitic chants at Madison Square Garden because of all the Jewish presence on the team. So the following year, there were no Jews on the team. So it was there's also that component.
Oh, I'm sorry. Walk us through what year there were no Jews on the team. Say that again. There were chants.
So the first year that the Knicks played, the whole starting lineup was Jewish. The year after that, they had removed every Jewish player on the team because of some anti-Semitic incidents and pressure and things like that.
That's in your book. I didn't know
Yes.
that. Okay.
And there's also a quote from the sports editor of the New York Daily News in the 1930s who says something along the lines of, basketball is naturally a Jewish game because it prioritizes like smart aleckness and dodginess, and so some stereotypes and tropes of Jews. The sports editor was saying, yes, of course Jews are good at basketball because you have to be a little shifty, right? This is a clearly anti-Semitic comment. I quote that in my book as well. So there's a history of both sides of that, but certainly like the basketball and Judaism have gone hand in hand for a long time.
Okay. Any perspective on anything in basketball you don't like now, or anything you'd like to see changed, or anything in the book you talk about that?
I'm a fan of the game. I try to take it as it comes to me. So of course, as a fan, there are things that maybe some rules that you wish were different. And again, I love watching the physicality of the 90s. When teams really there was a real lot of passion and camaraderie, and now the players have a lot more leverage and power, which in some ways is a really good thing. But in some ways, the teams don't stay together as long, and you don't kind of have that cohesiveness. College basketball is certainly that way. When I was growing up, you had teams like Duke and Kentucky, and they grew together and they stayed 4 years. And so that product was so fun, and I loved college basketball. It's less so the case now, because guys go to the NBA if they can. And so you don't really have those programs developing in the same way. So that's one thing that I liked better when I was growing up. But listen, the game does so much for so many people, whether you're a fan, whether you're a player, or in all different kind of ways. And that's a big part of my book, right? What can the game do for families?
Any feeling on like the bigger markets for small markets? Does that concern you? Like the little teams or the smaller markets have a hard time attracting the better players?
I think that's been less relevant nowadays because of how the world has opened up. When I was growing up, the New York Knicks and the Los Angeles Lakers, that's the only media market that you could really get exposure in. But now you could play in Oklahoma City, you could play in Milwaukee, you could play in San Antonio. The whole world will know you through Instagram and Facebook and all these other platforms. So I think that there's less of an advantage to some big market teams. And I think the Knicks have seen that in free agency. They've kind of relied on that, and they haven't been able to attract those players just solely based on that.
And also, I think what's changed over the last couple of decades is more of an international sport now. And there are more international players today than ever, right? So I think that's a big positive. I don't know if you addressed that in your book or not.
A little bit, but definitely, I mean, listen, the game is so international now. And, when my dad was playing in the 80s, there were hardly any players from Europe. And so when I tell people that he's the only player in NBA history whose parents survived the Holocaust, and you start to think about it, in order to have had that background, you likely needed to play in the 70s or 80s. There weren't many players from Europe, period, let alone Jewish players, let alone players whose both parents survived, right? And so to your point, yeah, the game is so international now. I think it's good. It's good for the game. It's spread around the globe. And as someone who played internationally, right? I played in all these different countries. I saw how the game is played differently. I learned a lot. I think the NBA game has been positively impacted by the international presence. So yeah, I think that the global nature of the game is a beautiful thing where it's played abroad and even here in the NBA.
What's your feeling on the 3-point, the emphasis on the 3-point? You think it's a good thing overall, or because that's a big change over the last 2 decades?
It is. Listen, there was something that I always liked about, putting the ball inside and taking the ball to the basket, which people still do, but analytics and data have become much bigger in basketball, rightfully so, right? Because you want to use numbers to tell stories to help you strategize better. And the data shows that that's a more efficient shot, because given the skill level nowadays, people can make 3-pointers at such a percentage that, the expected value of a 3-pointer is a little bit more than a 2-pointer. So I get it. I get it. I don't always love watching a game where they're just shooting threes because, it's fun to see kind of that variety in those different types of plays. But to watch people, again, like Steph Curry or Damian Lillard, come over half court and shoot the ball from 40 feet and make it consistently, it's outrageous that they do that. Because as someone who played like that's a far shot. They don't make it look far, but it's a very far, difficult thing to do.
Right.
So to watch them do that, it's incredible.
So you were telling Ben earlier before we got, so your book's coming out officially in 2 weeks. So talk us through the launch and the plan and what the vision is.
The book is going to be in bookstores and wherever bookstores sold on November 30th. So that's the release date. It's available for pre-order now. It has already reached the #1 spot in its category on Amazon, which is Jewish biographies, right? So it's already a very kind of sought after, acclaimed Jewish book, which is, you know, a real thrill for me. And yeah, listen, it's gotten really good reviews. And I wrote this. This is just a book that was written from the heart. You know, this is a book about family. This is a book about a story that not only means the world to me, but I think is important for the Jewish people 100%, but for people in general, because these are relatable themes. You know, like as I mentioned before, perseverance, survival, resilience, love of family. These are things that all human beings can relate to. And so I'm also very, very lucky. So Ray Allen, you know, who's a great NBA basketball player, was recently just named one of the top 75 players in NBA history. He wrote the foreword for my book, you know, and Ray was appointed to the board of the Holocaust Museum by President Obama. He is a staunch advocate for Holocaust remembrance, education. It's really his passion, and he uses his platform to educate about the Holocaust. My dad was the general manager of the Bucks when Ray was a young player, so I've known him for a long time. But even so, that doesn't mean that someone who's a global icon like Ray Allen has to write a foreword for my book, which is, but he didn't hesitate. He's, as I tell people, as great of a basketball player as he was, he's a better human being. And interestingly, he didn't know about my dad's background because it's not something my dad talks about publicly. You know, so when I told him, hey, both my dad's parents are Holocaust survivors. You know, my grandmother survived the Budapest ghetto. Like, he had no idea. You know, and he'd been to our home, and this is someone we spent a lot of time with. And so for him to align himself with our family story and others as well, like NBA Commissioner Adam Silver and CNN anchor Wolf Blitzer, like there's a lot of really kind of prominent people who have put their support behind the story, which means the world to me. And so, yeah, it's anyone who's listening today who'd be willing to pick up a copy and engage with the story, it just means the world to me.
So one thing I think is important for this Zoom and for our group, because we're recording this and it will get out, but I think a lot of grandchildren, you know, have a passion, have a story, but not many people actually put in the 5 years that you put in. And I think it's unfortunate. You know, I think every family has a story. I know your family story is very unique, from Holocaust to NBA. So that's, you know, that's why, you know, it's going to be a great bestseller. But, you know, if more, maybe if you can talk to other grandchildren, you know, whose family maybe didn't play in the NBA because you have a unique situation, but maybe motivate others, you know, why is it important as a grandson to tell the story, you know, of your family from that perspective?
100%. I'll tell you, like, yeah, like, okay, we have this interesting thing that happened with basketball, but our story is no more important than anyone else's. You know, when you know, I mean, this history, you know, is for the Jewish people, for those who had family impacted by the Holocaust. The stories must be told, and our generation is the one to tell it. You know, so I've had several friends who have grandparents who are survivors who have reached out to me, and I tell them, do the research, find out what happened, at least so you know it. You don't have to write a book about it if you don't want to write a book, right? Or you don't have to make a movie if you don't want to make a movie. But you must know the story, and you must transmit it to future generations and to other people. And I know from my grandma, I mentioned, like, she's so proud that I wrote this, but it's so meaningful because she always tells me, like, no, people don't know her loved ones existed, right? They were just killed in Auschwitz, which is, there's no greater tragedy. And also the notion of it could happen again. You know, so when there's injustice in the world, when, you know, when things happen, you know, you have to stand up for what's right. And my grandma has always kind of preached that, you know, for all those reasons, we have to share this history, right? We have to honor those who passed away. We have to make sure it never happens again to anybody, not just Jews, to anybody, you know? So I think, yeah, if there are people listening who have grandparents or survivors, know the stories, tell them, speak about it. And, you know, all the data has been really troubling about how little millennials know about the Holocaust. And, you know, it's not taught in schools to the extent that it should be. Listen, if, you know, this is history everyone needs to know, because man is capable of this, right? We've shown what man is capable of. So when there's injustice, this is possible, right? So for those reasons, we must tell the stories.
So has anyone reached out to you? I guess the book, is coming out at the end of November, but I mean, has anyone said, Dan, because of you, I'm writing a book, or you haven't gotten that feedback yet, or it's too early?
I haven't gotten it exactly like that, but I have one friend in particular whose grandparents are survivors, and she told me we've been thinking about writing something for some time. So I hope that it kind of gave her and I told her, just do it. And what's for me, right? I mean, when I finished my first draft of this book, my wife was so proud of me and I was grateful of that. But I told her, and this is the truth, I said, listen, to write the book, really what I did, the only thing I did was I got up at 6 a.m. every day for 8 months to write it. So it's really about, like, if you have the will and you have the motivation and the discipline, you can do it, and it doesn't. And so I always try to tell people that, like, it's not something that's going to happen casually, but if you're willing to sacrifice and put the time in, you can capture a history and a story that's really, really important, not just to you and your family, not just to the Jewish people, but to all people.
So for those of us who have not written a book, so you're getting up 6 a.m, you're writing this book for 5 years, and then how do you find a publisher? Maybe just walk us through that process, please.
So I actually got up at 6:02 in the morning every morning for 8 months. People ask me why 6:02. I say it was early. Say why not 6? I said why not 6:04? I woke up at 6:02. That was my time. That's how I got the first draft done. But so after the research, that's how I wrote it. Usually for a book like this, you would put a proposal together. So you would say, hey, my dad is this, well-known NBA person. People don't know that his parents survived the Holocaust. I want to write this book. Then you would get an agent. You would try to kind of sell, if you will, the concept. Then you would write it. I kind of did it backwards. And I did that based on the recommendation of a professor at Stanford who I admire a lot and who I was working with on a lot of writing things. And he said to me, this means so much to you. And this is so important to you. He said, write it. You just write the story that you want to write and tell the story you want to tell. And then you could figure the rest of it out. And so that's what I did. And I had done a lot of writing and I studied, I took classes and I really worked to get to the point, but I just wrote it. And then once it was written, I got an agent, then I got a publisher. So I kind of did a little bit backwards.
Okay. So your dad's going to come on shortly, because I was going to ask.
Yeah. If I can have him come if you think now's the time.
Yeah, that'd be great. Yeah. I want to know, I mean, he had to basically bless this process, right? Meaning you said you got your grandmother's blessing, talk about the Holocaust, which is hard, but your dad had to want to share his story with you and want it to be in print.
Yes. And so listen, these are very hard themes. This is not something my dad talks about publicly. But at the same time, he's very proud that I've told the story. And actually, when I was doing the research, I didn't tell my grandma or my dad exactly what I had in mind. I said, I want to memorialize our story. I needed a lot of kind of space just to write it in the way that was comfortable for me. And so I think that, listen, these are very hard themes. These are not, themes that are easy to talk about. And my dad is going to come join us in a minute to say hello. But I know that ultimately he's proud of me. I'll let him say that. He's proud of me and grateful for telling, an important story. And so I'll slide over as he makes his way. So you can say, Ben Goldberg.
Hello, everybody.
How are you, sir?
How's everybody doing?
You got a very special son. Thank you for coming on with us.
Special hello to Ben and Saul, his dad, and my friend Jerry Feinstein was also on there.
Okay. So this new book coming out is exciting. So your story really, it sounds like until your son put it together, the pieces weren't really known to everyone.
No, not at all. We didn't know it till it was done. He would do it all by himself. He'd ask questions and talk like most families do. But all of a sudden he said, I wrote a book. I said, really? On what? So he wrote the family story, and I couldn't be prouder of him. It's very difficult. For someone like me that's involved in it, there's a lot of pain involved in reading it sometimes, but I couldn't be prouder of the way he did it. There's some good humor in it, and there's some really good points that are made about perseverance and hard work.
Yeah, and I was saying that I needed that, I needed that space to be able to write it. So I wasn't like keeping a secret or doing anything behind his back, but for a story that's this deep and personal, it was nice to have that space. And my dad shared so many amazing stories from his life and career, and my grandmother did the same. So it was really fun to tell a lot of them.
So Ernie, because there are a lot of Nick fans on the Zoom tonight, and there'll be more Nick fans watching the recording. So talk a little bit about, so you played for the Knicks, which was really exciting. You were a general manager for the Knicks. Talk about maybe those two experiences, if you can give us a little, what was being a general manager much more meaningful because you had played for the team, or how would you compare those two experiences?
Well, I was definitely a Knicks fan growing up. In 73, they won the championships. I was in high school at that time, so I was a huge Knicks fan. And to be able to play for your hometown team is unbelievable. So playing is always best because you're your competitor. You like to get out there, you like to play. But I was with the franchise for 19 years. After I finished playing and retired, I was in the NBA for 9 years, the last 4 with the Knicks. I was a broadcaster for 3 years. Then I was an assistant coach for a year and a half, and then I moved into the front office and became general manager and then president of the team. So I was with the franchise for 19 years. So that was our team. That was our hometown team. So I felt great about both of them, really. But the playing part is always the most fun.
Okay, I appreciate that. And two other points. So did you ever personally, you don't have to answer, did you feel anti-Semitism, or whether when you played or when you were general manager?
No, I didn't feel any when I played or when I was a general manager. Growing up a little bit, I felt a little bit of that. When I came to the United States, I was 9 years old. I came here in 1964, so I couldn't speak English. And, kids would make fun of me a little bit for not being able to speak English, sometimes for being Jewish. But, in any kind of neighborhoods, if you grow up in New York, you have to stick up for yourself. And,
I think they're going to start making fun of people that speak English now. It's changing. But more as a child, but not through the NBA and not as general manager. You never felt anything
no,
negative.
not personally. Nothing ever touched me like that.
And I'll also add, he wore number 18 for the Knicks.
Oh, cool.
Right? Yeah. So that was a special thing.
So and so the Knicks, for a Knicks fan, it's a pretty good year.
It is. They're playing very well. Last couple of games, they fell back a little bit, but it's a long season. They have a very good coach, and they play really hard. They play together, and it's an exciting team to watch, I think.
Yeah. So when you come up to New York, you go to games, or do you go to the Garden, or not as often? You like to watch on TV?
I watch on TV mostly, but if I'm up in New York, they have a game, I'll go. Garden's the best. It's the best place in the whole league. There's no.
I got to thank you. As a kid, I used to go. I guess when you were general manager, I'm 50 now, but the playoffs and
the 90s.
Yeah, Indiana and New York, those were like the best tickets in the world. Those were really fun games.
No question. Those were great games.
Those were amazing. Ben, do you want to ask anything? Because you guys go back a couple generations.
I just miss you, Erin.
Come visit. He's a big hockey fan. I'll take you to the Capitals game.
I'm a big Ranger fan. Ernie knows that. No, Ernie, my youth was amazing because of you. I got to be honest. My Knicks days growing up, nothing like you come to the Garden. You always treated us like royalty. So it was a highlight of my life.
Goldberg's a family to us, so we love them.
And now we bring the kids, so it's nice. I'm happy the Knicks are relevant to an extent.
Yeah.
So Ernie, you're not involved with the Wizards now at all, correct? You're just living in DC.
No, we're living in DC. My daughter lives here. I have 3 grandkids here. My son has a little boy, but he's on the West Coast. He's visiting now. So we like it here. It's a nice area to live in. I do a little consulting for a couple of teams. And
I was going to ask you, at what capacity, like owners, just as far as like
general managers that I used to, work with, or my friends would from time to time call me to ask me what I see and, what kind of suggestions I may have for them. Just to get a different set of eyes.
Okay.
It's nice to relax a little bit more and spend a lot more time with the family, especially the grandkids.
Sure.
They keep you moving.
But so you don't see yourself getting into an ownership role, or you're not looking to come back in aggressively right now.
Well, you better have $1 billion at least to be an owner nowadays.
Ben was still alone us, so.
Yeah, the values of teams have really skyrocketed. So I don't see myself in that capacity. But if someone wants me to be a partner, I'm right there for them.
Okay, okay. But we really appreciate it. I'm gonna invite the rabbi on if he has, Rabbi Babbage. Rabbi, did you have any questions for the Grunfelds?
Yes, for sure. And first, I want to thank you, Dan, for the time today, and Ernie as well for joining us. Quite an interesting conversation. And Ernie, the question is really for you. Just over the weekend on Shabbat, a congregant came up to me, to speak about the program this tonight, and he said, Ernie Grunfeld was my hero growing up as a child. So I'm sure you knew that you, as a Jewish ball player for the New York Knicks, which has in New York, which is a large Jewish population, eventually an owner, I'm sure that you knew that you were someone that was very significant in the American Jewish kids, worldview. So I want to know in what way you're aware of that, and in general, how your rich Jewish roots, if that affected the way you conducted yourself throughout your career, both as a player and as an executive.
Well, I knew in New York when I played there, obviously it's a very large Jewish population, but when you're a basketball player, you're an athlete, you just got to go out there and play and do the best job you possibly can. I did a lot of things in the community. I went to speak in certain synagogues and things of that nature. But when you get on that basketball court, there's no religion, there's nothing like that. It's all about who can play the best, and who could win the game.
Right. But it seems like both of you have remained very down to earth, as Ben started off the introduction. Very humble, very down to earth. Dan, growing up, you were probably a celebrity, I assume, because your father was Ernie Grunfeld. And Ernie, as you said, when you walked around the synagogue, I'm sure that you were a celebrity anytime you stepped in the synagogue as well. So it's quite impressive you're able to remain so relatable despite the success.
Thank you for that.
Rabbi.
Thank you for that.
He's a very humble young man, but I'm very proud of him. What he did was quite an achievement.
Thank you.
I agree. That's exciting. So you have a picture of the book to show people? You have a copy, or we sent it out? You don't have one there?
I don't have one with me, unfortunately, but listen, it's available where all books are sold, on Amazon and elsewhere, and I'd be just delighted if people would pick up a copy or two. It comes out during Hanukkah, by the way.
That's good. That's a good Hanukkah gift.
I didn't plan that. It was actually supposed to come out next week, but it got delayed a little bit. So now it comes out during Hanukkah, which is great.
God had a plan. To tell us about the title. First of all, did your dad give you any input, or he really let you run with this thing?
He let me run with it, and
that's a great dad.
He's a great dad, but supported me, which is really important. But yeah, it's the title's called By the Grace of the Game. It's very hard to title a book. We spent a lot of time thinking about what the right title is.
Sure.
But to me, that says a lot, because basketball has been so significant for our family, and it has felt heaven sent in a lot of ways to kind of start where we started and end up where we ended up, but basketball being that vehicle. So I think the title speaks volumes about kind of the whole story.
No, it's exciting. So looking forward to reading it. And you said you can get it also on Audible for those that like to listen and not to read.
Absolutely. Audible, Kindle, it's everywhere. And so, yeah, I'm just grateful for the opportunity to share a little bit of the story and for all the support. And thank you all so much.
So I don't know if Ben told you or the rabbi, we're in the middle of a major construction project, but when you guys are in New York, we'd love to have you in the synagogue. Maybe we'll do a Friday dinner together.
We would love it.
So
a little davening together.
A little davening together also. Davening, learning, eating, drinking, all the above. But we look forward to seeing you guys at Fifth Avenue Synagogue, and we appreciate your time. And it's really, as your dad said, it's really incredible what you've done. A lot of kids, they think about doing things, but 90% of life or 99% is about execution, and you really stuck with it. You persevered, and I wish you only great success with the book and good health. And I'm sure your grandmother's shepping a lot of nachas.
A lot of nachas. That's for sure. Jacob, thank you for an awesome conversation. Rabbi, very grateful. Ben, you're the best. Love you, man. And just grateful to everyone. Thank you.
Okay, everyone. Happy Hanukkah and good luck with the book.
Thank you, everyone. Bye.
Thank you. Bye.